It was the kind of story you'd hear in whispers at the local diner, the kind of tale people tell when they think no one's listening. The Waverly Mansion, they called it, nestled deep in the woods, forgotten by time, and swallowed by the vines of history. It had stood there for over a century, its once grand facade now a crumbling monument to neglect. No one had lived there for years, but the rumors never died. It was haunted, cursed, dangerous. Naturally, I couldn't resist. I'd always been drawn to the unexplained, to the dark corners of the world where mystery lingered in the shadows. So, when I heard the stories of the Waverly Mansion one evening over a few beers, I made up my mind. I was going to spend the night there. The drive to the mansion took longer than I expected. The woods were thick, their canopies stretching out like arms trying to keep me from leaving. The air grew cooler the deeper I went, and the further I drove, the more it felt like the world around me was fading. The road was narrow, winding through towering trees that seemed to close in on me with every turn. It was like something was watching, but I didn't let it bother me. I had come for an adventure after all. When I finally saw the mansion looming in the distance, it was even more imposing than I had imagined. The Waverly Mansion was huge, its towering stone walls covered in ivy and moss. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the shadows of the night. The place looked like it had been forgotten by the world. The gates, rusted and barely standing, creaked as I pushed them open and drove up the long, gravel driveway toward the front entrance. The house stood there in all its decaying glory, silent and still. As I parked the car and stepped out, the air around me felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't explain. The wind whispered through the trees, but there was no sound from the mansion itself. It was as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. I stood at the front steps, staring up at the massive wooden doors. They were cracked and weathered, but still solid. I had come here to prove something. To myself, I guess. The rumors of strange noises at night, the flickering lights, the disappearing residents, those were just stories, right? I wasn't scared. I had spent the night in enough abandoned places to know what to expect. Just dust, cobwebs, and the occasional squeaky floorboard. I pushed open the door, the sound of it creaking loudly in the still night. The air inside smelled musty, like old paper and forgotten memories. My flashlight flickered for a second as I stepped into the foyer, but it steadied as I moved further into the mansion. The floors creaked beneath my feet, and the faintest sound of something moving in the distance caught my attention. I paused, listening intently, but there was only silence. The house seemed alive in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just a building, it felt like something more. The walls seemed to loom, like they were watching me, waiting for me to make the first move. I shook the feeling off and moved deeper into the house, hoping to find a comfortable place to settle for the night. The hallway stretched before me, lined with faded portraits of stern-looking ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow my every step. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of years of history. There were no signs of recent habitation, no lights, no modern conveniences, just the cold, empty mansion. I made my way through the grand hallway and into what appeared to be a large parlor. The fireplace was empty, and the furniture was covered with dust. It was obvious no one had lived here for a long time. But the oddest thing about the room was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes with a lack of noise. No, this was different. It was almost as if the silence was waiting, as if the room itself had something to say. I shivered involuntarily and took a deep breath. This was going to be fine. I wasn't going to let some creepy house get under my skin. I set up my sleeping bag in the middle of the parlor, making sure to position myself in a place where I could easily see the doors and windows. I wasn't taking any chances. But as I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, I couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of discomfort. Something wasn't right. Maybe it was the isolation, the oppressive stillness of the mansion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't just a building. It was something more, something waiting. The clock on the wall ticked louder than I expected, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer with every passing second. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but the sensation of being watched never left me. Something in the house was stirring. I tried to shake off the feeling that the mansion was watching me, but it was no use. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind that seeped through the cracks in the walls, made me more acutely aware of the presence around me. It wasn't just the silence that unnerved me, though. It was the sense of being watched, as if something inside the house knew I was there. Something old, something ancient. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The shadows danced on the walls, their shapes twisting and warping in the dim light of my flashlight. I found myself lying still, listening to the distant groans of the house settling. It was hard to tell if the sounds were natural or if the house was alive in some way, groaning and shifting like it had a pulse of its own. Around 2 a.m., I decided to get up and explore the mansion further. I knew it wasn't the best idea. After all, the whole point of spending the night in an abandoned mansion was to test my nerve, not to get wrapped up in some creepy atmosphere. But the house had been quiet for too long and curiosity had begun to gnaw at me. I stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and grabbed my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the grand room. I moved to the large staircase that spiraled upward into the unknown. The steps creaked beneath my weight as I ascended, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated, glancing down the hallway to my left. The air felt colder here. The walls, lined with faded wallpaper, seemed to press in on me, making the hallway feel narrower. A slight breeze made the loose pieces of wallpaper flutter, as if the walls were breathing with me. I moved down the hall, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me, their eyes following my every move. Their eyes, though painted, had a depth to them that made me feel uneasy, like the people in the portraits were alive, their gaze fixed on me with a mix of judgment and curiosity. I passed several closed doors, each one looking as old and untouched as the last. But one door stood out. It was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking through. Something about it felt different. I wasn't sure what had drawn me to it. Maybe it was the eerie silence of the house, or the way the door beckoned me, urging me to open it. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges squeaking in protest. The room beyond was smaller than the others I had seen, and it was filled with old furniture, some draped with dust-covered sheets, others missing pieces altogether. It felt like a forgotten place, neglected and left behind. The first thing that struck me was the large mirror across from the door. It was covered in dust, but I could still make out the reflection of the room, though the edges of the glass were warped and the image was distorted. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam catching the glass. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, the distorted reflections of the furniture playing tricks on my eyes. But as I studied it more closely, I realized what I was seeing was no illusion. In the reflection, standing in the far corner of the room, was a a shadowed form, its features indistinct but unmistakably there. It was looking at me. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the corner of the room was empty. Nothing. I turned back to the mirror, and there it was again. The figure, standing motionless, its dark silhouette barely visible in the murk. It didn't move, didn't speak, but it was there, waiting. I backed away from the mirror, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? Was it a trick of the light? Or had something, or someone, been hiding in the room with me, watching, waiting for me to look away? Before I could process what was happening, I heard something else. A soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood coming from behind me. I spun around again, this time not bothering to hide my panic. The room was still empty, save for the heavy dust hanging in the air. But the scraping continued, louder now, closer. It sounded like it was coming from the floorboards. My flashlight flickered once more, casting strange, erratic shadows along the walls. The scraping grew more intense, louder, almost as if it were moving across the floor toward me. I wasn't sure whether I should run or stay. I wanted to scream, to call out, but my throat was dry. Every instinct told me to leave, but my feet remained frozen in place. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was coming from the corner of the room, the same spot where the figure had been in the reflection. "You shouldn't have come." My blood ran cold. The voice was faint but clear. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. Someone, or something, was speaking to me from the corner of the room. The air grew colder, the shadows growing thicker as I felt the cold pressure weighing down on me. It wasn't just the walls anymore. The room itself seemed to be alive, its very presence suffocating, pressing against me. The voice repeated itself, this time louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't have come here. You're part of this now." That's when I realized it wasn't just the house that was alive. The mansion wasn't empty. It was waiting for me to uncover its dark, twisted secrets. I was part of its history now, and there was no going back. I turned and fled, my footsteps pounding against the floor, my flashlight flickering wildly as I rushed toward the stairs. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't escape. The house had claimed me, and its walls had already begun to tell me their secrets. I didn't stop running. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tore down the dark hallways of the mansion, my flashlight barely illuminating the path ahead. The sounds of the scraping and whispers seemed to follow me, echoing off the walls, growing louder with every step I took. I didn't know where I was going anymore. The mansion had become a labyrinth, the rooms stretching into endless corridors that twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the house itself was trying to trap me, to draw me deeper into its depths. I had to get out. I had to. But the mansion was no longer just a building. It was alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights above me felt like the house was watching me, listening to my every move. The very walls seemed to pulse, and I could hear faint murmurs seeping through the cracks, voices low and indistinct, like an ancient language being spoken just beyond my comprehension. I wanted to block it out, to ignore it, but the words were impossible to ignore. "You are part of this now." The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't human. I stumbled into a large, open room. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the tall, arched windows. I was almost at the exit, almost there. But as I ran toward them, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. The windows, which I had thought were clear, were covered in thick layers of dust and grime. But more than that, more than just the dirt, I saw shapes on the glass. Faint, shadowed figures, just barely visible in the light of my flashlight, moving across the window pane. It was like something, or someone, was standing just on the other side watching me. I backed away, my breath quickening, but then I felt it. A chill in the air, creeping up from the floor, making my skin prickle with cold. It wasn't just the temperature. It was something darker, something more sinister. The house was feeding on my fear, getting stronger with every moment I spent inside it. The whispers had turned into full sentences now, voices that grew clearer and clearer. I could hear them from the walls, from the floor, from above me. You can't leave. This is your place now. It knows you. It always has. I spun around, clutching my flashlight like it was a weapon, searching the room for anything that could explain what was happening. The air was thick with the oppressive weight of something unseen. The walls themselves seemed to be closing in on me, pushing me toward the center of the room. The voice came again, but this time it was louder, clearer, more commanding. You are not alone here. I froze, my blood turning cold. I had heard that voice before. It was the same one that had spoken to me in room 217, the one that had warned me. The figure from the reflection, the voice that had hissed from the shadows, it was all connected. The mansion, the figures, the whispers. They were all part of something far more malevolent than I had ever imagined. And then, for the first time, I understood. The mansion wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it was feeding on the very fear it created, using the darkness and the secrets of the past to consume everything in its path. I couldn't stay in this room. I had to get out. I sprinted toward the door, my feet pounding against the floor. But as I reached for the handle, I felt it. The walls around me seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was locking me in, trapping me with its secrets. I yanked at the door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't open. The wood groaned under my hands, the handle shaking as if something on the other side was holding it shut. I turned back to the room, but now the shadows seemed to have taken form. Figures, dark, indistinct shapes, moved along the walls, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They weren't human. I knew that now. They were part of the house, part of whatever cursed entity had taken root here. The walls seemed to be alive, their surfaces rippling and shifting like liquid. The air thickened, pressing against me as if the house itself was closing in. Slowly, methodically. I heard the voice again, this time louder, more forceful. You belong here. You always have. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of panic flood through me. I couldn't stay. I couldn't let the house consume me like it had consumed so many before me. The walls were closing in, but I refused to give in. I looked around, desperate for a way out. But then I saw it. A door hidden behind a pile of broken furniture in the corner of the room. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to beckon to me. I ran toward it, my legs heavy, but I couldn't stop. This was my chance. This was my way out. The door was old, its wood cracked and weathered, but the handle turned easily under my grip. I pushed the door open, not caring what was on the other side, just desperate to escape. As I stepped through, I felt the weight lift, the walls retreating. The air became lighter, the house no longer pressing in on me. I slammed the door behind me, gasping for breath. I was in a narrow corridor, the walls lined with dark, faded wallpaper that seemed to swirl and move as I glanced at it. But it didn't matter. I was free. I could hear the mansion's hum fading behind me, the whispers quieting. I was getting away. But as I ran down the corridor, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The door I had just come through was gone, and behind me, the walls of the corridor began to shift, closing in around me once more. The narrow corridor behind me seemed to stretch further and further as I ran, my heart thudding in my chest. My footsteps echoed in the silence, but they didn't sound right. Too hollow, too distorted, as if they were being muffled by the walls themselves. Every time I looked back, the hallway behind me seemed to change, the walls bending and shifting as if the mansion were alive, stretching, breathing, trying to pull me back in. I couldn't stop. I knew the house had been playing tricks on me, but I couldn't let it win. My legs burned from the effort, but I kept pushing forward, my flashlight beam flickering wildly as I desperately searched for a way out. The air had become thick, oppressive. It felt like something was closing in around me, like the very walls were leaning in, watching, waiting. As I turned a corner, I found myself in what appeared to be a grand staircase. The banister was intricately carved, the wood dark and polished, but it had an unnatural sheen to it, almost like it was too perfect. My flashlight shone on the ornate rug that stretched down the stairs, the edges curling slightly, revealing dark stains that had long since faded into the fabric. I stepped back, hesitant, but the pull of the house grew stronger with each passing second. I glanced up at the top of the stairs and froze. At the landing, at the top of the stairs, there was a door. But this wasn't any ordinary door. It was different from the rest of the house. It was grand, larger than the others, and it gleamed in the dim light like it was made of gold, its handles shaped like twisted vines. There was no dust, no cobwebs around it, no sign of age. The door seemed impossibly new, out of place in the crumbling mansion, like it had been designed to stand out, to beckon anyone who dared to approach. The whispers returned, more insistent than before. "Come closer. You're almost there." I didn't want to go toward it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and run, to leave this place before it consumed me entirely. But I was already too far in. I had broken the rules. The mansion had drawn me in, and now I was part of it. The door called to me, its golden handles gleaming, its presence undeniable. I couldn't resist. I moved toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if the mansion itself were weighing down on my every move. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the golden handle. I could feel the warmth radiating from it, almost like it was alive, like it was waiting for me to open it. With a trembling breath, I grabbed the handle and twisted. The door opened with a soft, almost imperceptible click. I stepped through, expecting to find a room or perhaps an exit, anything to get away from the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. But what I found was something else entirely. The room was large, its walls lined with shelves filled with books, papers, and strange artifacts I couldn't recognize. It smelled ancient, like dust and decay, but there was something more, something deeper, like the scent of old secrets hidden away for far too long. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate desk, its surface cluttered with old papers, some yellowed with age, others so dark with ink they were nearly unreadable. The desk was made of the same polished wood as the banister, but it looked even more out of place in the dim, forgotten room. On the wall behind the desk hung a large portrait, one I hadn't seen in any of the other rooms of the mansion. It was a painting of a woman, her face serene, but her eyes seemed to follow me. No, they watched me. They weren't just painted, they were alive. The woman's expression was hauntingly calm, as though she knew something I didn't, something terrible. I moved closer, unable to tear my eyes away from the portrait. As I stepped forward, my foot brushed against something on the floor. I glanced down and saw a small black book, its cover worn and faded. The edges of the pages were brittle with age. I bent down, picked it up, and opened it. The book was filled with strange symbols I didn't recognize. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, as if the person who had written it had been afraid of being caught. I skimmed through the pages, the words becoming more disturbing as I read. There were references to rituals, to ancient ceremonies, and, most chilling of all, mentions of the house itself, as though it had a will of its own. And then I saw it. One passage was underlined, its words scrawled in bold ink. The house will take what it is given, and in return, it will never let go. I could feel the weight of the words pressing down on me, sinking into my mind. I knew, in that instant, that the mansion hadn't just claimed me. It had claimed everyone before me. The whispers, the shadows, the figures I had seen. They were all part of it. And the more I uncovered, the deeper I got into its secrets, the more it would consume me. I turned to the portrait, my heart racing. The woman in the painting was no longer just a picture. Her eyes, those haunting, predatory eyes, had begun to change, shifting with a dark intent. Her lips curled into a slow smile, as if she knew I had uncovered the truth. And then, something moved behind her. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, thicker, until they started to stretch toward me. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, icy fingers that sent a jolt of fear through me. I spun around, but the room was empty again, except for the book. The walls began to hum, low and rumbling, vibrating with power. The air thickened, and I could feel the mansion's presence wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I had uncovered the mansion's secrets. Now it was time to pay the price. I should have known better. I should have stopped when I had the chance, but I had opened the door, and now there was no going back. The mansion was alive with dark forces, ancient rituals, and something far more malevolent than I could comprehend. The air grew heavier around me, the walls pulsing with an unseen energy, and I could feel the house closing in, wrapping its cold, suffocating grip around my chest. The room, once filled with an oppressive silence, was now vibrating with an unnatural hum, like the low growl of a creature waking from a long, deep sleep. The shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching out across the floor and up the walls, as if they were reaching for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was watching me. The woman in the portrait, her smile had twisted into something almost cruel, her eyes no longer serene but cold and hungry. I turned to leave the room, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crack. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, panic rising in my throat. I tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The weight of the house was pressing in on me, making it feel as though the walls were closing in. My breath became shallow, and I struggled to calm myself. I had to think. The whispers were back. Low, guttural voices echoed through the room, swirling in the air around me. Their words were incoherent at first, indistinct, but the longer I listened, the clearer they became. You can never leave. It knows you. You belong to it now. My skin crawled with the realization that the mansion was more than just a haunted building. It was alive, and it was feeding on my fear. The voices swirled around me, getting louder, filling the room with an almost deafening roar. The floor beneath me vibrated, as if the entire house was alive, moving in sync with the growing chaos. The walls themselves seemed to shift, the shadows deepening, the air becoming thick and suffocating. I knew now what I had to do, but part of me, the part I had been ignoring for so long, wanted to run, wanted to escape, to forget the twisted history of this mansion and the ancient forces that had claimed it as their own. But I couldn't. The house wouldn't let me. I turned back to the book in my hands, the one that had started all of this. I had to understand more. I had to learn its secrets, find a way to break the mansion's hold before it consumed me entirely. My fingers trembled as I opened the pages again, my eyes scanning the frantic, scribbled notes that filled the pages. There were references to rituals, to sacrifices, to deals made with ancient entities that thrived on fear and despair. The more I read, the more I realized how deep the darkness ran. There was one passage, written in bold, desperate handwriting, that caught my attention. It was underlined, the ink thick and smudged. The walls are the key. They remember everything. The mansion can be stopped, but only if you break the cycle. You must understand its hunger and feed it what it craves. I could feel my pulse quicken as I read those words. The mansion fed. It had been feeding on everyone who had lived here, on every soul that had entered its gates, and it had never stopped. The walls themselves, had witnessed every twisted event, every dark pact, every death. They remembered everything. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. The temperature plummeted. The walls seemed to vibrate again, the sound of creaking wood and groaning plaster filling the room. And then I saw it. The walls began to move. Slowly at first, but then faster, the stone and wood bending and shifting, the very foundation of the house shifting like a living creature. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The room around me was changing, warping. The shadows were no longer just shadows, they were shapes, dark and shifting, taking form, like they were trying to break free from the walls themselves. The air was thick with an energy that made it hard to breathe, like something was awakening. And then I saw them. Figures emerged from the walls, twisting shapes of darkness and light. They weren't human. Their bodies were contorted and writhing, their faces obscured by shadows, but I could feel their eyes, cold, piercing, hungry. They circled around me, moving closer, their presence suffocating, pressing against me like the very walls of the mansion had come alive. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. The shadows closed in, wrapping around me, and I felt my body grow heavier, my movement slower. The darkness was suffocating, and I could feel myself being drawn into it, my vision blurring, my thoughts slipping away. And then I realized the mansion wasn't just hungry for fear, it was hungry for me. I had read enough to understand. The mansion had chosen me, like it had chosen so many before. I was the one it wanted to claim, the one it wanted to consume. I had walked right into its trap, and now I was trapped within it, just as every person who had ever stepped foot in this cursed place had been. I could feel the cold fingers of the shadows pulling me closer, their whispers filling my mind, drowning out everything else. I was losing myself, losing my grip on reality. The mansion had taken everything from me, and I was slipping away, becoming just another part of its dark, eternal history. But there was one last thing I could do. I had to break the cycle. With everything I had left, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the lighter I had brought with me. The book, the walls, the darkness, it all had to end. The walls remembered, but they would not forget me. I set the book alight. The flames leapt up from the lighter, their orange tongues licking at the pages of the book I had been holding. The heat was immediate, biting at my fingers as the paper began to curl and blacken, releasing the faint smell of burning ink. I watched, my mind still hazy from the overwhelming pull of the mansion, as the fire spread across the pages. The shadows around me recoiled, their shapes flickering in the flickering light, but the air was still thick with darkness. The walls groaned as if protesting, as though they could feel what I was doing, as if they knew that I had just taken the first step to undoing what had been done for centuries. The shadows pressed in tighter, and the whispers grew louder, frantic now. You can't escape. The house will always have you. You are a part of it now. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't listen to them anymore. I had seen enough, learned enough to know what had to be done. The book was the key to understanding the darkness that had festered within the walls of the mansion, the key to breaking its hold on me. The book had been written by someone who had failed to escape, someone who had fed the mansion with their fear and despair until they had become part of it. I had seen the portrait of the woman in the grand hallway, her eyes watching me, knowing I was part of the house's history. She had been a part of it too. She had given herself to the mansion, as had so many others. And now, as I watched the book burn, I realized something horrifying. The mansion wasn't just alive in the physical sense, it was a living memory, a place where souls were trapped, where they were consumed, and where they were rewritten into the fabric of the house itself. It had taken their essence, twisted it, and made it part of the walls, the rooms, the very ground beneath my feet. I was standing in a tomb, a prison for the lost. The mansion fed on its inhabitants, consuming their fear, their pain, their very souls. It had claimed me, just as it had claimed everyone before me. But as the book burned, I felt something shift. The walls, which had been alive with darkness, seemed to shudder. The shadows that had surrounded me began to pull back, slowly retreating as if they had lost their power. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight that had been pressing on my chest lifting. For the first time since I had entered the mansion, I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. The fire consumed the last of the pages, turning the book to ash. The remnants of the dark knowledge scattered into the air like dust, falling to the floor at my feet. The mansion, which had been shaking and vibrating, went still. The walls, the portraits, the furniture, all of it seemed to exhale, as if the house had been holding its breath for far too long. I stumbled back from the ashes, my legs unsteady. The whispers had stopped. The pressure in the air had lifted. The mansion no longer felt alive. It felt empty. For a brief moment, I thought I had succeeded, that I had broken the cycle, freed the mansion from its centuries-old curse, and freed myself from its grip. I felt a strange sense of relief, as though the weight of the house's history had been lifted off my shoulders. But then, I heard it, a soft creaking, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The noise was coming from behind me, from the hallway. I turned, my body tensing, my breath catching in my throat. The door to the grand room, the one I had entered earlier, was now wide open, but there was no light beyond it, just the darkness. The air grew heavy again, cold, suffocating. The shadows moved. The whisper returned, but this time it wasn't in my mind. It was real. The voice was clear, and it echoed through the house, filling every corner of the space. You thought you could burn it away? You thought you could escape? I turned slowly, my blood running cold. The door to the grand room creaked again. louder this time, as if the house was mocking me. But something else had changed. The room wasn't empty anymore. The woman from the portrait, the one with the haunting smile, stood in the doorway, her eyes still watching me, her expression unchanged. But now, she was no longer just a painting. She was real. Her presence was like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. And then I understood. The mansion had never truly been just a place. It was her, and all those who had ever walked through its doors. It had fed on their souls, kept them trapped inside its walls, rewriting their stories into the fabric of the house. The mansion wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by memories, the memories of those it had consumed. The woman stepped forward, her face contorted in a twisted grin. "You're not free," she said, her voice cold and final. "You will never leave." I ran. But this time, the house didn't just stand still. The walls came alive again. The door slammed shut behind me, locking me in with no way out. I was part of the mansion now, part of its history. The walls remembered me. I had tried to burn it away, but the mansion's hunger was insatiable, and now it had claimed me forever.